Hi everyone, I'm Phoenix Ilu, and I wanted to hop on here to talk about a little tidbit on healing childhood trauma and moving beyond personal narrative. So I took a class a number of years ago where our teacher one day he put up a picture on the screen and asked us to take a few minutes to look at this picture and then identify what it was that we saw. And so the point of the exercise was not to talk about, our thoughts around the image or what we could infer from it, but to specifically just look at what are you seeing in this image. And so what we saw was what looked to be as if somebody was in a church. And there was a woman and a girl on the ground. The woman appeared to be crying, and the girl appeared to be comforting her. So there was, of course, a lot of inferences around, this is most definitely a church. The woman is crying, the girl is her daughter, right? There was all of these different things that went into it. And our teacher kept having us just, nope, go back and look at just what you see from the image. And so ultimately, what the picture was a woman on the floor with a girl next to her and surrounded by other people, right? And so what the point of the exercise was to see how in the very first moment, that flash of insight, when you look at this picture, what is it that you're seeing? So for me personally, I went through a lot of really, really difficult relational experiences. And so immediately, my narrative that colored this picture was around, this woman had maybe been abused. This girl had, was comforting her, maybe had also experienced that abuse. If it was in a church, maybe it was like religious abuse, right? Or religious trauma, something like that. And so through that process of viewing, okay, well, what is the image? And then what is the narrative that colors that image? That began to open up insights. And so for me, I personally had an experience as a child that made me feel as if I needed to save my mother. And so my narrative that has been coloring so much of my life has been exactly that, saving people, right? And so once I was able to identify what my narrative was, it allowed me to begin to peel back the layers and go back into my own process of, well, what happened in childhood that made me feel that way, right? So, for those of you who are looking into ways of understanding, well, what is my childhood trauma? What I would say is pull up an image of a social setting, any image. And the moment that that image is pulled up, write down every single thing that comes to mind, whatever it is, whatever the lens is that's coloring this picture for you, write all of those insights down. And when you have them written down, go back through and begin to piece together what happened in my childhood that has me feeling this way. And so once you're able to identify that, you can then go back in and do a technique where you begin to parent your inner child. So a lot of times this could look like, for me personally, going into the mental memory, the image of that moment where I wanted to save my mother as a kid, go back in as your adult self and give your inner child a hug. Give yourself a hug in that moment. Or even just like voice to that person mentally and emotionally, you are loved, you are safe, you don't need to save anybody, there's nothing wrong, right? And so through that process of reparenting yourself, you'll be able to really go in and begin to loosen a lot of the energy that surrounds your narrative and your experience. And the more that you write down, the more that you go back in and parent yourself in those ways, the more you'll actually be able to bring yourself into the present moment anytime that your narrative starts to color your experience. And then you start to remind yourself, okay, I'm all right. I don't need to go into all of these trigger responses, trauma responses, or anything like that. And a lot of times things will just be unconscious until we pay attention to them. And so allowing those parts of ourselves to come in and be there is incredibly necessary to help us be able to move past maybe recurring experiences that we might have in our lives. So I just wanted to hop on and give that little piece of insight around childhood trauma. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments below, and feel free to reach out. I work with people around spiritual integration, so understanding that there is a more holistic approach to the way in which we integrate these aspects of our narrative and our story and our lives all back together. So I love working with individuals that feel fragmented and want to create a new system for themselves where they can bring those pieces back together. So again, my name is Phoenix, and I've really enjoyed our time here.